it's the anniversary of my mother's death, and I'm just trying to gather my thoughts about how I feel. And it's usually it's a complex kind of feeling. It's never really very straightforward, especially as the years go by and circumstances change and so much has happened since. But this week I have been remembering certain things. I saw some children singing carols the other day, and it really brought back a very poignant memory for me of being in the hospital with my mother. And it was all quite quiet, and it was during her last days, and she was no longer very lucid, and a group of children came into the hospital. It was around this time of the year, so December 22nd, and a group of children came into the hospital and sang choirs or carols in the hall outside. And it was quite emotional for a number of reasons, because my mother's job was as a teacher of mostly junior infants and senior infants, so 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old children. And the big highlight of her year was doing a nativity play, which is kind of common, I suppose. It's a universal thing across the world. The celebration of Christmas, and so every year there'd be a lot of focus on doing those Christmas carols. So to hear that outside in the corridor, it was a very emotionally charged moment anyway, because I was about to say we all knew she was dying. I suppose, did I know she was dying? I'd never known anybody to die before. I mean, I was only 19. I'm pretty naive, so no, I didn't have a clue really what was going on. That's the truth of it, I suppose. And that's one of the difficulties. That's one of the difficult things in trying to process the memory, is because it's never very straightforward. You know, you see depictions of it in films, and you see a doctor coming out with a clipboard saying, "It's not good, she's got 6 months," you know. And then 6 months go by, and then exactly after the 6-month date, death happens, and everybody knows it. And you know, I realised that the truth is very different. Nobody ever comes out with a clipboard and tells you that somebody's going to die. Nobody ever tells you anything. Well, that's what happened. We were told pretty much nothing. And I remember when I did ask a question, I was treated like a criminal for asking, and kind of interrogated in response, which is a totally separate topic really, which I should get into at some stage. But that was a bizarre experience. But anyway, to get back to the carol singing, so it was during the week, about 2 or 3 days ago, I was listening to these children in the city centre singing carols, and it really brought back that memory of being in the hospital with my mother, seeing her slip into unconsciousness, I suppose, and hearing the Christmas carols being sung outside. Very bittersweet. And at the end, when they finished, she hadn't really been moving or talking, but at the end she kind of lightly clapped her hands, because she loved that kind of thing. She loved children, and she taught them for many years, and she loved that whole thing of Christmas. And I suppose her entire profession revolved around that kind of was kind of the peak moment of the year, the nativity play, and cherishing all those children. And she was very much an old-fashioned type teacher. nowadays there can be a tendency in teaching, it's just kind of pushing children through a system and popping them out the other end. I think she because she came from such a rural area, she kind of looked on it as a vocation, I suppose that's the word. Bit of a cheesy word, but we would meet children and their parents out in town, and there was a feeling that she was a much loved figure, and some of the people looked to her for some sort of guidance, I suppose, and love and attention and affection. And so that was the memory that triggered it back, and it's now the anniversary of her death. And I suppose it's a universal thing. Everybody goes through this process at some point. So no matter where you live, or you go through this process of grief, and then the feeling afterwards, which is memories and anniversaries and little things that trigger specific memories and moments. And just wanted to explore it because I've gone through various phases in my life where I've gone through periods where I didn't want to think about it, gone through periods where I had to think about it because I had to try and process some memories which were not always very pleasant, but I felt I had to do it anyway. And in my case, my parents died when I was quite young. I was in college when both my parents died. So my mother died first when I was 19, 20, and then my father died soon afterwards. He kind of fell apart, I think, really, once she died. So it was that was quite a stressful, mashed, emotional time. And it was, so within a very short space of time, they were both gone. And because I was in college at the time, it was, I never really got to know them as an adult. Either of them, really. At all. Which is a strange feeling. Because when you're a child, you don't have any appreciation of who your parents are. They're just there. They're mostly there to cater for every whim that you have, which is natural way of things are. And I see friends of mine who still have their parents now, and they're in that period where they cherish them and they get to experience them as equals, almost as an adult, and I envy that to an extent. I wish I had that. And there is a part of me that is missing that phase, and I have my own child now, and I miss that connection maybe that she might have had with them. So it's been a very long period of time since, and it was a very wet night. It was streets were drowned in water. It was lashing rain the night she died. And that was the first time I'd ever known anybody who died, which was, and it was a very abrupt introduction to death. Somebody so close to me, and I was alone with her at the time that she died. We kind of took it in turns to look after her, between my siblings and my uncle, and so I was alone in the room with her, and she was breathing very shallow and then just stopped. And she seemed quite happy, I suppose, moving on. And partly for that was she was quite religious, she had a lot of faith, and the Bishop of Cork at the time, Bishop Buckley, had been in West Cork and met my aunt a few days previous and had asked her how are things? And she said, not great, because my sister is very unwell. And he made a point of driving into Cork City to visit my mother that night. I think he just got into the car and went straight over. And she died soon after in a very calm, peaceful way. I'm forever grateful for him for doing it. It was kind of that guy, and I've known him for years. He's been a very, really decent, spiritual type guy, and has made a positive difference in countless lives in Cork. He's retired now, but a really special, unique type guy. So I suppose looking back on all the years, it hasn't been easy. It's been a struggle at times. It's been quite tough, and I kind of feel that now. As I think back, I feel I'm struggling, that life is quite stressful, and I suppose at times, and it's kind of seems pointless saying it, but I feel I'm reaching out for somebody. I'm reaching out for support that maybe I could have had. Maybe if there was, I suppose parents are the one people who stick by you to the end and will be there if things are, if you're in trouble or if you're struggling, and are dedicated towards giving you that sort of support. And I miss that, even though that's the theory of it, and in practice that may not always be the case. But there's a fantasy, I suppose, that could be the case, and that life could be easier with that, you know, at times when things are tough. It's very strange, because I've lived most of my life without my parents now, and the memories are kind of fading. It's so distant. It's like a film that I saw once a long time ago, and it's these characters that played a role, and it's difficult to remember. They're kind of patchy memories, which of a very different time. And commemorating, the whole notion of commemorating my mother's death is an important concept in itself, because she was very careful about commemorating the people in her own life who had died, like her own mother, her own father, and her sister who died tragically in a drowning incident. It was very important to her, and I'm conscious of that, and it's important to me to remember. No, it's bittersweet remembering back. And it's difficult for me to assess exactly how I feel about it all now. I suppose I used to have dreams where I had them back. You know, I had my parents back for a short while, and you know, you get to have that perfect day with them, and as an adult, and get to know them, really. I suppose that's one gap that I have, is that I didn't know my parents. They were, because I think the time that you get to know your parents is when you're an adult, and you get to acknowledge them and understand them, all the decisions they made, or the crappy decisions that they made, the difficulties, the kind of trauma and all that, and you get to work that out probably with them maybe not explicitly, but through understanding, getting to know them on a deeper level as an adult, as a one-to-one, on a one-to-one basis. And without that, there's a hole there that is kind of difficult to process. It's quite a lonely night. There's a howling wind out there, which normally I like, but it's quite cold, and I am not feeling well. There's an empty kind of feeling, quite a lonely feeling, and I don't know if the two are connected, but it's because now they're gone, the only thing I have is a tendency sometimes, which I don't tend to entertain that much anymore, but a tendency to role play them, to take them and imagine happy scenarios. Which I kind of stopped allowing myself participate in recent years, because it's such a waste of energy and emotional energy that I don't entertain those thoughts anymore. Part of me, I suppose, is proud that am I proud that I've done the job that I have done over the last few decades to make a life for myself, for my daughter, and because it's been tough sometimes, part of me is very exhausted at the moment. And a lot of it is also wrapped up with the fact that having left where I grew up, now being in a different city, it's all of those memories are kind of packaged in Cork, where I grew up, and going back there, particularly over Christmas, just brings up, it unearths a huge amount of memories very suddenly, all together and all at once, both positive and negative, and it can be a very complicated, difficult thing to process. My mother was from a very small rural town in West Cork, and when I was growing up, I was nurtured on stories about that small town living, and those stories had a very deep influence on me, even to this day. Even when I'm writing, it's very influenced by that formative influence in my life at the very start. They were magical, very simple stories of very, what Kavanagh would call the ordinary plenty, just normal, ordinary people living simple lives, but in a magical way, in a really close-knit community where people really relied on each other, and there were characters, and not just characters, but those characters were entertained. They weren't isolated and divorced from the community. Everybody was cherished, and that's one of the things about modern life now, is successful people group with successful people, and people who are not are kind of shunted out to the side because they're inconvenient. But older life, and that, not trying to over romanticize it, but it was a fact of those life in all rural Ireland that people did. Everybody was valued as being part of the community, even the rogues, the gamblers, the drunkards, people, characters with real character and colour about them. And those stories covered all of that. When I was going to bed at night, I fell asleep to this. The wonder of those simple stories of those characters, the drunks, the gamblers, the lunatics, the crazy men, the colourful people, that all knitted together to form the life of that small town in Muskogee. And it was fascinating listening to it. I couldn't get enough. Never wanted those stories to end. To go back there now, it's totally changed. It's very different, like most places. But I still have those memories of those stories. So, yeah, I suppose, how do I feel now? It's kind of similar evening to the evening when she died. It's dark and cold, inhospitable night. It's quite a lonely, raw feeling to the air. And I suppose, how do I feel? I feel quite exhausted and lonely and just a bit, maybe that fantasy of reaching out. Sometimes I just feel I wish I had somebody to just say, just give me a dig out here, just take this off me and help me out. Actually, I felt quite good even just saying that, because, you know, maybe I'm not even conscious of it, but maybe I feel I need that just sometimes to be able to get that support just when things get tough. And maybe it's your parents that primarily are the ones that give that to people. Maybe not. I don't know. Not having parents, I don't know whether that's the truth or not. It just, I suppose it's easy to idealize it. From the outside, it does seem that way in other people's cases. Death is a very strange thing. It's leaves behind memories which fade slowly, but also maybe you reinterpret them and change them, I suppose, as you mature, as you change, as you maybe reach a different age level. I was talking to a guy in work and he was retiring, and I said, what would you like to do in your retirement? And he says, well, look, my parents are getting old now, so I think I'll go down and spend some time with them. I couldn't believe his parents were still alive. He was 65. And that was a bit of a shock, you know. It was, it's strange. I don't know. Could it have put more fire into me that I have to look after myself, or to be more independent, to be more self-sufficient, to go out there and chase things in life? I suppose it is true that I have a fire in me of ambition to improve myself, to self-improve myself, to chase things in life. But also, I do have a feeling of exhaustion and a feeling of being worn out. And sometimes I feel I wish I could just pass over a bucket of stress to somebody to make it a little bit lighter. And yeah, stress is a different story, but how do I feel now? I suppose I've always overstressed myself over the years. Sometimes You know, I felt the need to push myself a bit too hard, because I suppose I had this inner fear that if I didn't, that I would be a loser and a failure. Kind of ironic, really. And I suppose I didn't really have much of a balance. So I suppose some of that came from those stories of that small village in West Cork, because people either, a lot of the time, those characters, almost in a Shakespearean way, they met their conflict and their obstacles, and they either overcame them and became very successful, or some of them were crushed by them and became alcoholics and drank their lives away and met fairly miserable outcomes. It seemed to be quite black and white that way. So tonight, I suppose it's happy anniversary, Mum. I miss you. And I'll see you someday. God bless.